This is the Panasonic GM1, and I personally think it's one of the best pocket-sized mirrorless cameras you can buy, ever. But this is the Panasonic GM5, and not only is it the successor to the GM1, but as numerous people on the internet keep telling me, this is apparently the superior camera of the two. Now, one of those people on the internet is actually my friend and fellow YouTuber Emily, or as you might know her, Micro4Nerds. And she was actually kind enough to ship one of her GM5s all the way from the UK to me here in Canada, so that I could see for myself whether this is in fact the better option. And, spoiler alert, after a few weeks of using this thing, I think Emily and everyone else might just be right. But despite me liking this camera so much, there's actually one fairly significant downside that means that I will probably never end up owning this camera, but we'll dive into that a little later on. For now though, you're probably asking yourself, what exactly makes this camera just so good, and why are so many people, myself included, praying to the camera gods that Panasonic will one day come to its senses and release an updated version? Anytime this century would be good, Panasonic. Anytime now. Well, let's get the most obvious point of attraction out of the way. Its small size and weight. This is as small as a pack of playing cards and weighs just 211 grams, or around 7.4 ounces body only. So, needless to say, provided that you pair it with a relatively small lens, like this 20mm f1.7, which is an absolute babe by the way, then this, for me at least, is the very definition of an amazing everyday carry-along camera. But it's not just that, because you see, inside it also houses a relatively large 16 megapixel 4/3 sensor. Now, before all of you full-frame fanatics and APS-C aficionados practically trip over yourself rushing to the comment section to tell me that 4/3 sensors aren't that big, mate. Firstly, in the world of miniature mirrorless cameras, this is about as large as it gets. Really, the closest competitors to this thing are the likes of the Pentax Q and the Samsung NX Mini, and as we've covered already on this channel across numerous videos, all of the sensors in those things are noticeably smaller than this one. The only other small-ish mirrorless camera to compete with this is the Olympus EPM1 and 2, but they are about as appealing to look at as a hobo's chocolate starfish. Granted, someone, somewhere in the world will get immense pleasure at looking at that type of thing, but for the rest of us, not so much. But moving swiftly on from that mental image I've just scarred into your brain, I think because this system is called Micro 4/3, most people instantly think that the sensor in this is going to be absolutely tiny. But in fact, if you look at a chart like this, you can see that it's really not all that far off the size of an APS-C size sensor, which is a format that is way more widely accepted these days. I mean, at the very least, it's significantly larger than the smaller sensors in the cameras that I mentioned previously. Basically, all I'm trying to say here is don't knock it till you tried it, which coincidentally is exactly what that hobo said to me that one time when I met him in an alleyway when he was bending over. Anyway, sticking to the topic of image files, let's talk about image quality. Now look, let's remember, this is a 10-year-old camera, so the sensor technology is fairly dated. And as a result, if you push the raw files a little bit too hard, then particularly in the shadows, you'll start to notice some noise creeping in. Though remember, we do live in the age of AI, and with a click of a button, this can be removed very easily, if that type of thing even bothers you. Besides that though, the images these cameras capture have plenty of detail and lovely colors, making them really powerful pocket point and shoots. Now, we also need to talk about what's in front of the sensor. Yes, that's right, both of these models include a mechanical shutter, unlike the vast majority of the pint-sized rivals that we've already mentioned. That said, there is a slight caveat to that, and that's the fact that this mechanical shutter is only functional up to a shutter speed of 1/500th of a second. Once you go past that point, it'll resort to using the electronic shutter, but personally, I'll take that over not having one at all. Now, both of these cameras also include full-sized SD card slots too, which isn't always the case for smaller cameras, for example the Samsung NX Mini and the Nikon 1J5. But the final, and let's be honest, one of the main reasons why people love to own these cameras is because of their looks. Panasonic clearly took some notes from what Fujifilm were doing when they designed these things, and they've gone for a very sleek and classic metal leather rangefinder style combo thing going on here, which I think makes both of these look just absolutely beautiful. But that's not all, because they also appear to have taken some inspiration from Pentax with their Q range of cameras, because you can get both of these models in a whole range of quirky colors too, something that I know is right up Emily's street. Personally, I prefer to own cameras that reflect my personality, monochromatic and void of character, but you know, each to their own. Okay, so we now get why people love these things so much and what they offer over the competition, but we now need to decipher why this GM5 is vastly considered the superior option over this GM1, and I believe it comes down to three main reasons. But before we get onto that, we first need to mention today's sponsor, and that's Wondershare UniConverter 16. UniConverter allows you to quickly convert your video footage into any format you need, making them compatible across different devices and platforms. You can also compress large video files without sacrificing quality, which is perfect for faster uploads and saving storage space. Enhancing low-quality video clips and images is also made super simple with its built-in AI technology, allowing you to increase resolution and clarity with just a few clicks. Not only that, but batch processing means that it can handle multiple files all at once, saving you valuable time when working on larger projects. And if any of that sounds useful to you, be sure to check out Wondershare UniConverter 16 using the link in the video description below. Anyway, let's start with the slightly controversial one, and that's the flash, because on this GM1 we get this tiny pop-up flash on the top here. But on the GM5, that's been removed and has been replaced with a full-sized hot shoe port. Now, I know this is probably going to be a subject that will split opinions, and I get that pop-up flash can be handy to have sometimes. However, as someone who never really uses pop-up flash, given the option, I would much rather have a full-size hot shoe port for attaching accessories and an external, more powerful flash if I need it. Plus, getting rid of the flash has allowed space for them to add on an EVF, which is the second big difference between these two cameras. Now, one of the biggest complaints I hear people making about the GM1 is that there's no viewfinder. So for those people, the GM5 is your answer. Now, I'll be totally honest, I personally tend to prefer using the rear screen for composing shots, because after years of using a DSLR, all of that shooting with one eye closed has actually caused a slight stigmatism in my left eye. Just one of the joys of getting old, kids. You'll learn about that soon enough. Anyway, that means that when I use an EVF for long periods of time, it tends to give me a bit of eye strain. But that said, when shooting on a bright sunny day, having an EVF to rely on really does come in clutch, even if the display on this thing is absolutely miniature. Okay, so finally, and this is the biggest thing for me personally, on the GM5, they have added a proper command dial on the back here. Unfortunately, on the GM1, you only get one of these. Go back in, will you? You only get one of these flimsy little D-pad style designs, which, let's be honest, nobody actually likes. I don't know why they bother. Now, although this GM5 is only 6mm taller than the GM1, that was clearly enough space for them to not only fit in this thumb dial on the back here, but also to add these three buttons, two of which are custom function buttons, and the remaining one is the playback button. On the GM1, we do get one function button, but it happens to be tucked away on the top here in the middle of this basically redundant dial, which we'll talk more about in a second. And that means it's A, not really all that easy to reach, and B, you kind of just forget about it. Forget about it! But now on this GM5, they are well within reach of your thumb, and they've also made them slightly raised, which makes them just way easier to locate with touch alone. And by moving all of these buttons up here from down here, you now have more space for your thumb. And they've even created this little lip section here, which just helps to add more grip. Now, the only slight fuck up I think they made was with this record button. And no, it's not the placement that bugs me, because it's pretty much in the same place as you can find it on the GM1. But on the GM1, they put this rim around the edge, and who doesn't love a nice bit of rimming? It's the right terminology, right? Well, apparently Panasonic don't, because they got rid of it for some reason, and now this is way too easy to accidentally press with your thumb. The good news though is that you can at least choose to deactivate this record button entirely within the settings menu, and considering that this only has very basic 1080 HD video capture, it's probably not a feature that most people would use these days anyway. Now, although 3 changes doesn't sound like a huge amount, when shooting with this GM5 after a year of owning the GM1, these subtle improvements definitely make a big quality of life improvement. But all of that said, there's still one fairly significant reason why I probably won't be selling my GM1 anytime soon to get this GM5, and that's because of the price. You see, currently you can buy a GM1 on eBay for anywhere between £300 to £500 or $400 to $600, depending of course on the color, what it comes included with, and the condition it's in. And whilst I personally think that is still a little bit on the expensive side for what it is, I almost threw up in my mouth when I saw how much the GM5 sells for. That's right, this camera sells for anywhere between £500 to £800 or $750 to $1,000, and in some cases even more than that. Now, when you consider that not only is this camera 10 years old now, but at launch it was retailing for around $899 with the kit lens, we're talking Fujifilm X100 levels of value retention here. So consider this next section of the video an open letter to Panasonic. Hi, please bring back the GM range for 2025. There is clearly an overwhelming demand for a super small, lightweight, good-looking, and powerful camera, and the two you've already made are absolute bangers, but we're ready for a new version, and here is my list of demands, recommendations. Firstly, take the GM5 design as the blueprint and don't be tempted to remove anything. I know what you camera designers are like. You just can't bloody help yourselves sometimes, and you just start lopping things off when you really don't need to, so just don't. Leave it. Okay? But there are a few kind of exceptions you can make. For example, if you can, add on a flippy, tilty screen. Ideally one that can sit flush to the body when it's not in use, like the one on the Fujifilm X100 because that one is sexy. And make it touchscreen, please. All of that should be pretty straightforward so far, right? So secondly, get rid of this dial here that controls the AF modes. We really don't need it, and if we do, we can just assign it to one of the function buttons on the back. That's exactly why they are there. Now, move the mode dial from here to here, and then keep this dial blank so it can function as a fully customizable dial. Finally, and I guess this somewhat goes without saying, we'd of course like to see a newer sensor with improved image quality and autofocus features. And if it's possible to squeeze it in without compromising the small size, IBIS would also be greatly appreciated. That's it. That's all you really need to do. We've already done the hard work, guys. This looks great. We just need to carefully spruce it up a little bit and make it ready for 2025. Now, in the unlikely scenario where a multi-billion-dollar global tech giant decides not to bend to the will of a 2-bit influencer with a goofy British accent, and you want a small pocket camera like this, then really you're stuck answering one question. Is this GM5 actually worth paying around double the price of the GM1? Well, I guess that answer will depend entirely on how much you value having an EVF, a hot shoe port, and slightly better handling in the way of more buttons and dials. For me personally, although this GM5 is clearly the better camera of the two, I am way too tight to be paying the current asking price for it. So unless the cost of these things drop significantly, I think I'm happy to stick around with my GM1 for the time being. But if you're willing to keep your eyes peeled on the auction sites and you do manage to bag a GM5 at a not so horrendous price, then honestly, you are in for a treat, because this could very well be one of the best miniature mirrorless cameras ever made. Oh, almost dropped your camera, Em. I know what I'm doing.
You tit!